I never knew nothing about human trafficking. I never knew that I was being exploited. I never knew. I didn't wake up and be like, oh, this is what's happening to me. It's something that I thought was normal.
80,000 reported missing people on any given day in the United States. At the same time, there are over 10,000 unidentified bodies. There is no national law requiring agencies to share this information, leaving many families in the dark about their loved one's fate.
Today, family and volunteers, they reported cadaver dogs detected a few locations where human remains might have been buried.
You could have a body that was on one side of a county line, and the next county could have had that individual reported as missing. And no one may have talked to each other.
And we just haven't forgotten, and we're not going to stop until we know what happened.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Gone Missing Pod. My name is Nicole Mercado, and I am joined by the lovely Alyssa Gutierrez.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. So today our episode is going to be a little bit different, everyone, and we're going to kind of get into it. We're going to get right into the case with a little bit of a preface. So we had originally covered Enrique, Ricky, Angel Medel. We will be calling him Ricky for the rest of this episode. Back last summer, I believe it was July of 2021. His sister then reached out to us and said, a lot of the information that you guys had found was not correct. So we wanted to talk to her, and she was gracious enough to speak with me and take like almost 2 hours out of her day to just talk to me and let me know about her brother and just like the case and kind of everything that goes in it, because a lot of the information she felt was not correct, and again, we try to preface this as much as we can, but a lot of this information is found through all of the information, right, is found through different websites and different articles. And we do try and compare the articles to make sure that they're all roughly the same. Obviously, you'll get sometimes a little bit of a height difference or slight age difference, but
right. But we are pretty thoughtful to say like, hey, we went down a Reddit hole. No one's quoting Reddit as a reliable source. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just to give some background, or if our information comes from, news stations, we say that, yeah, this was from PBS, ABC, whatever, that city's news station. Yes. And so, obviously there's a degree of journalism there,
right? Journalistic privilege for sure.
Of course. So yeah,
but things happen and things are written down incorrectly, and obviously that's the only information we have, so that's what we go off. And Delfina was like, hey, this is not what happened, and so we apologized. We are removing that episode, and we wanted to put this new episode up here so that you guys have the corrected information on Ricky, because it is important that you all have the facts so that they can hopefully get answers. So let's get into the case of Ricky Medel. Enrique Ricky Angel Medel was only 14 years old when he went missing in Albuquerque, New Mexico on March 17th, 2011. His younger sister, Delfina, like I said, she took time to really provide us with proper information from the case. And she was kind enough to, go through that, because it can be alarming. She didn't even know some of the information that was put out online, which was also really upsetting to her, which I understand, her and her family, because to not be aware of this information and then be like, well, that's not even correct. It can take away from, finding her brother and finding those answers. So Ricky and his sister Delfina and his mother Olivia, they lived in New Mexico until the kids were 3 and 4 years old before moving to Missouri. Ricky and Delfina thrived there. Delfina said that Ricky joined boxing and he dedicated his life to it, even though he was like such a young kid. And he actually later won the Junior Golden Glove World Championship, which was a massive accomplishment. And this was something he continued to do even when he moved back to New Mexico some years later. So Delfina said that it was amazing. They loved their lives there, but I don't think they had, when we talked, it didn't seem like they had a ton of family there. Her mom, from what I understand, is from New Mexico. So you have a base there, and you're homesick. I get it. I understand. It's gotta be difficult to be somewhere that you don't feel is truly, your home, where you grew up and where you have all that family. When the kids were 10 and 11, their mom moved them back to New Mexico. So Delfina is younger than Ricky by a year. So she was 10 and he was 11. And Delfina said it was really difficult for them there because they lived in an area that was called, quote unquote, the war zone. It was a high crime area in the city. And maybe it was due to the area or Ricky trying to create relationships and friendships in the area that he ended up with some friends who were not a particularly good influence on him. When we were talking, it kind of reminded me of some of the neighborhoods that we have in Chicago, like the high crime and just like kind of being surrounded by those influences and kind of kicking into survival mode. One of these individuals that he was friends with, and I say friends loosely because he doesn't seem to be a very good friend at all throughout this. His name was Andy Trujillo. Trujillo was found after Ricky went missing with Ricky's grandfather's rosary, which Delfina said Ricky never took off, and Ricky's backpack. Trujillo claimed that he knew nothing about Ricky's disappearance. However, Delfina said years later she saw Trujillo while driving. He was in the car next to her, and when she told him who she was, he and the rest of the people in the car sped off. So she said that she had seen him and she was at like a stoplight and she looks over in the car and she recognized him. And she called him. And when he realized who she was, he took off with the people in the car. So it just felt very sketchy. You know, like, why don't you want to talk to me? If you were my brother's friend, why don't you want to talk to me?
Exactly. That's suspicious.
It's really suspicious. And I think she had every right to be suspicious about that kind of attitude. And again, to be found with like Ricky's belongings, but saying, I don't know what happened to him, then how did you get them?
Exactly.
So there was just very little explanation, it seemed, on his side. And then Trujillo's story also changed on several occasions, but he was never arrested for having anything to do with Ricky's disappearance. But Delfina's family and it seemed law enforcement believed that he knew more than he claimed. Just because the stories kept changing, nothing really stayed consistent. You know, it all felt off. But it seems like law enforcement didn't have enough hard evidence to keep him and then charge him. Delfina also said that the family heard many stories throughout the years, but nothing led them to finding their loved one. So rumors were that he was buried out in the quote unquote mesa, which she kind of explained it to me, but it's like a big flatland kind of plain from what I looked up. It's basically nothing, right? Like it's nothing.
It's New Mexico.
Exactly. So her family actually went out there and searched for him for days and were unable to locate him. And then it was also rumored, a law enforcement said, he's in the mesa where I buried him. Then from another individual who's an affiliate of Trujillo said, that fool is long gone, referring to Ricky.
So basically they're insinuating that he was killed.
Yes. And they're two people from two completely different groups, right? Law enforcement and that, but it just kind of feels like people know something and they just aren't saying it.
Right.
At the time that before he disappeared, Ricky was also part of a rap group called Street Frame Inc. And they used like a closet as a studio because he just loved to make music. So it was like with his friends, you know, it was something that they bonded over and that, you know, he was really passionate about. Well, after he disappeared, the group made a song about him, but instead of talking about his disappearance, they actually spoke about avenging his death, which the family thought was really strange and directly asked them about, but they denied having any information. However, the lyrics imply otherwise.
Right. I mean, it sounds like that was his crew, you know, those were his, in the neighborhood with him, getting into the same things together. So they know what happened. And we get it. We understand, you know, the way tight-knit groups and crews, especially they're following a different set of rules if they're living in a bad neighborhood, you know, and it's pretty typical for people to keep their mouth shut and not say anything. But honestly, to put it in a song, I mean, that's maybe they're trying to give, you know, somebody a message, but protect themselves as well. Who knows? And
that's kind of how it feels. Like it feels like really foolish of them to like put it in songs and to make it into a song and then to outwardly deny it to his family. It's like, well, no, because you're implying that you know something. So why imply something if you don't want to come to us and tell us what happened? And like, you know, I don't even think Delfina or her family would have said who told them this information if they came to her. They just want to know. So at this point, it's just cruel. It's cruel to the family. So Delfina and her mother, along with family members, have been consistently searching for Ricky. They even paid private detectives, one of them who stole their money and ran. And they didn't have that extra money to spend. You know what I mean? Like, it's expensive to hire a private detective, and they just had to depend on law enforcement to find him. However, there was some issues with law enforcement as well, because Ricky's case ended up in the cold case files without the family's knowledge. And in fact, the detective that was originally on the case had transferred not only out of the department, but out of the state, and the family was never directly informed of this.
Man, New Mexico's law enforcement and investigating agency. I mean, I keep kind of waiting for a little more, law enforcement facts, but there just doesn't seem to be a lot of involvement.
It didn't seem there was a lot of involvement there. They did mention that there was a strained relationship between law enforcement with Ricky, due a lot to his last name, because the last name, there was some things affiliated with it due to family member affiliations, and it made it more difficult for Ricky's case to get the attention it needed. And like she had mentioned, like he was hanging out with people who maybe weren't a good influence, but my thing still comes down to he's a 14-year-old kid.
No, exactly. No, none of those are
good reasons.
Valid reasons for law enforcement to not do their due diligence, to not do their job, regardless of any bias, you know what I mean? Regardless of bias, period.
I feel like we see this a lot, especially with like cases where maybe, with law enforcement and maybe kids who kind of got into some type of trouble, is that the law enforcement is like, well, they're not doing good things. So like they're just going to keep not doing good things. But it's like, where were the adults? Where were the authorities? Where were the people who were supposed to be helping lead him? Because from what I understand, he needed that. And even when he was boxing, like he loved boxing, he loved doing that. But, even the people there, it seemed, were like, well, if he's going to make choices that we don't agree with, then, he's just going to make those choices. He's 14. Like, this is the time to get involved and say, hey, like, we want to see you do all these amazing things, and we want to see you do better for yourself. So like, don't make those choices. And I feel like Ricky never even got the chance to turn that around for himself, because nobody was giving him that opportunity, and like we had talked about his mom in the previous case, and it's like she worked 2 and 3 jobs as a single parent. And a lot of times Ricky and Delfina, would stay with family members, if their mom was working. So it's like, where was the assistance that she also needed as a parent? Because our society does not provide for single parents. We don't live in a society that helps them and benefits them in a lot of ways, Right. Like, we can even look at it when the pandemic happened and you had single parents who had to go to work still. And what could they do with their children? We were like, well, you have to go to work, but we're not going to help you.
Exactly.
Delfina said that while Ricky was affiliated with some people who were not great influences, it was out of survival. The war zone provided their small family with limited options when they first returned from Missouri. And although Ricky actually used to clean yards when he got back from Missouri to New Mexico to make some extra money, it soon was just like not enough to provide what they needed. It's something that, like, living in Chicago, I think we see a lot, especially certain neighborhoods, is like we see that it's the struggle to survive, and you're just trying to do the best that you can to make sure your family's okay.
Definitely.
So on the day that he went missing, Delfina said she was 12 years old and actually in school. When she returned home, her family had been frantically trying to get in touch with him on his phone, but nobody could reach him. The neighbor had said she had heard someone rummaging around his room, because I guess they were like, the houses were next to each other and her room was across from his room.
Okay.
So she said she called to him when he was walking out of the house, but he just kept walking, which was really unlike him. Delfina said he was like very respectful to especially like his elders. So it was.
Do we think it wasn't him?
So I don't know if it wasn't him or if it was that maybe he was so consumed with something else going on. Like, because he was clearly looking for something if he was rummaging through his room. So she's like, I don't know, nobody really knows what happened from there. And while several outlets said that an uncle had seen him on the night of March 17th and told him to go home, Delfina and her mom said they were not given that information. Like, they didn't hear about that and nobody told them directly. So she's not saying it isn't true, but they were never told about it, which would be a little strange, especially because it would have been someone related to them, So the only thing his mom does know is that before he disappeared, he told her, quote, "Hey mom, I know things are hard right now, but they'll get better. They'll get better."
I mean, that was really nice that he was encouraging,
It's
his
just,
mom.
yeah. And I'm sure it's like heartbreaking for her because he's trying to make her feel better. And it's, it's a hard situation for all of them, but he's trying to be this supportive child and supportive son. And, she clearly like appreciated him. He was so loving to them that it was like, it's just heartbreaking. So Ricky was only 14 when he disappeared, and his birthday is February 12th, 1997. His family has now gone 10 birthdays without him, with no answers and no movement on the case. His sister Delfina and their mother Olivia still search for him and are trying to find answers. Ricky's mom worked several jobs to provide for her children, doing as much as she could. And Delfina, now a mom herself, is raising her children with the childhood she wanted. And she was so amazing and such a wonderful soul. And they continue to tirelessly advocate for Ricky. And I asked Delfina if there was anything else that she wanted to share about Ricky, because that's something that we don't always get to see. We don't always get to see like quotes from the family. And Delfina said, "He liked drawing. He had nice handwriting, and there were so many things people didn't know and they didn't want to know. He was a very dedicated, loving person with a huge heart and strived for what he wanted and never gave up. He was very loving. He would always take our socks. It was so funny. He was a comedian and he was the funniest person ever and very respectful."
That's awesome that we could spend, this time remembering who he was. You know what I mean? Like whatever happened to him, I'm glad that I know, oh, cool. Like he had this passion about boxing, like for her to describe her brother as dedicating his life to it at such a young age, like for me, that says there was passion early. And then, I feel like he was artistic because he had this passion for music and he liked to draw it, like little things. Okay, he was detail oriented for a guy to have nice handwriting. She's right. It is the little things. And it is the things that most people don't pay attention to, especially when they're stuck in survival mode,
And people on the outside, I don't think acknowledge as being important information when it truly tells us who they are as people, right? Like,
right. I mean, if people don't know what it's like to live in, that type of neighborhood, like you said, you and I, okay, we're a little more familiar because we have neighborhoods similar to, where we grew up around, even just in the city, even sometimes where we live as adults, we're around it because, okay, great, we live in Chicago. But this is like, New Mexico, totally different climate, totally different landscape. Things are different there in the Arizona. And you're right, unless people can interact with it, they just don't understand the frame of mind that when you're in survival, you're just living a different life versus people that don't, are ignorant.
Right. And, my thing is like at the end of the day, he's a 14-year-old child. And I would hope that nobody would judge me on things that I did at 14 as a 32-year-old woman, and it's like, he did not get the opportunity to make any more choices because it was taken away. And he's missing, and his family deserves answers. And Delfina is thriving. She is an amazing mom. She has an amazing job. Like, she clearly turned her life around. And I told her, wherever Ricky is, like, he is absolutely watching over her babies because, what she has been able to do and how hard she has worked to provide for him, like for her kids, is truly amazing to be in that situation and to get out. And her mom is also such a fighter and trying to advocate still for her son to make sure people know who he is, who he was, and the type of person he was. It's like, I don't think we should be defined by our mistakes. Like, mistakes are just that, and it doesn't define who he was to them. He was a son, a brother, an uncle, like that's my thing. And again, a child at 14 years old.
Well, that's awesome that, she's thriving, because it almost seems like, well, one, he would be proud, but two, it seems like, that was his goal. He was an advocate for his family. He wanted to support his family. He wanted better for his family, even in supporting his mom, saying, okay, yeah, they're hard right now, but they're going to get better. Well, guess what they did? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Delfina, that's awesome. And it's awesome for her children and, for their future generations. And I know, obviously Ricky will always be the catalyst for that,
Yeah. And she said he was such a protective big brother. And I think, he was protecting her for so many years, being her big brother. And now she's advocating and protecting him, and I wanted to give her all the credit because we always say we can imagine what it's like to be in their position. So knowing that she has the strength in her, to keep going year after year to just find answers and ask questions is like, that's the kind of family member we would all strive to be in these situations, is to be the one who's a continual advocate for those members that we don't have around us anymore. If you have any information about Ricky Medel, please contact Albuquerque Police Department at 505-242-2677. A really big thank you to Delfina for taking the time to talk with us and, just tell us about Ricky and who her brother was. I also want to say thank you to Alyssa for doing this episode with me. If we need to correct something that's not right, we want to do that. We want to make sure we're getting the correct information out there to help the families find answers. And we both felt really strongly about that, which is why we're doing this today.
Well, thanks, Nicole, for taking the time to get these additional facts and, for bringing his name back up.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to our editor and producer, Mike Mercado. We want to say thank you to the Mercado Airwaves Network for hosting us each and every week. If you want to look at some past episodes, you can go to Facebook at the Gone Missing Podcast or on Instagram and Twitter at the Gone Missing Pod. You can also go to Patreon, become a patron at patreon.com/Mercado Airwaves Network and look for the Gone Missing Pod.